Hey guys, it's Lohpally here with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 supports for 9.10. This patch for the most part hasn't adjusted pretty much any of the champions, just some minor tweaks to a couple of champions including Zyra's Plant, so there weren't too many changes in terms of power level of most of the champions. So we'll just jump into number 5, which is going to be NAMI. Now NAMI comes in at number 5 just because of her accessibility and her abilities to kind of neutralize a lot of bad matchups. Just because the sustain is really reliable, easy to use, and since the bubble also gives you a lot of kill potential in lane, you have a lot of opportunities to not only kill people, but you can also just have bad matchups where you're just sustaining up and just scaling and defending your ADC. Since AD carries right now are currently very important to protect in most team fights, and NAMI pairs well with almost all of the champions that are currently being played, like Vayne, Kai'Sa, Lucian, etc. She just does a pretty good job of doing the jack of all trades. Sustains well, CCs reasonably well, and can kind of carry lanes if you're hitting your bubbles quite frequently. So jumping into rune setups, there's going to be 2 different rune setups that we're looking at. The first one is my personal favorite, and the rune setup I mostly run in most situations. It's going to be Airy. After that, we're going to be optioning into Mana Flow Band and then Transcendence. I've liked Transcendence as of recently since the Absolute Focus nerfs, just because of the fact that it's always guaranteed AP when you overcap on CDR, and until then it's always guaranteed CDR to kind of curve out your build a little bit better. Although it takes a little bit of time to come online since it takes some time to hit level 10, I found that Absolute Focus doesn't give me that much more pressure in lane, so the extra ability power is pretty negligible. After that, for the most part, I take Gathering the Storm, just because I'm not a big fan of Scorch since you're not constantly poking and trading nearly as frequently on NAMI. But you can opt into Scorch if you want to have a lane bully, or you feel like you can win the lane quite hard and Scorch will get you there. After that, you either deviate between the Resolve Tree secondary with either Conditioning / Bone Plating, but I like Conditioning personally since I think Bone Plating comes off too easily and tends to not mitigate that much damage, especially in poke matchups, and then Revitalize is the second part. The other option you can do is the Inspiration Tree, where you can go Biscuits, which will just solve some of your mana problems and general sustain issues in the early stages while you're building up Mana Flow Band. And then I've been liking Cosmic Insight since the nerfs to the boots. I think that now that the boots take 12 minutes, it just sometimes has situations where maybe you're not being involved in a lot of kills, and you run into a lot of issues where you can just not have boots for a full 12 minutes or even like 11 minutes in some cases, since the duration is reduced by 45 seconds now. So I've been opting into Cosmic Insight, and I found that I like this a lot. The other rune setup we can be running is Guardian. Now this page is more ran for situations where maybe you're against like a Nautilus, a Thresh, an Alistar, and you're scared of getting all in and you're not going to be poking quite as frequently and auto-attacking. So we're going to be taking Guardian. And then I've been a big fan of Font of Life just because I like the interaction with slowing people and just having extra healing. The numbers on this will be relatively low, but I like it, especially if you intend on building Ardent, because when your ultimate is going across them, or if you hit a bubble, then your teammate can hit the player, proc Font of Life, which technically is you healing them, which then procs Ardent. So it means that you don't have to dump your heal nearly as much to just roll the Ardent buff on people. After that, like I've said before, I'm a big fan of Conditioning, but you can take Bone Plating and lane matchups where they're going to all in you, and it's not going to get randomly bounced off. This is completely acceptable. And then we're going to be running Revitalize for that extra healing and shielding. After that, we're just going to be opting into Sorcery and just going the Mana Flow Band and Transcendence. If you don't like this page, then what you can do is just switch it over to Inspiration with the Biscuits and 5% CDR from Cosmic Insight. They're both completely fine and mostly personal preference. So jumping into build paths, you can go Coin or Spell Thieves on this champion. Most of the time I recommend Spell Thieves, but in situations where maybe there's multiple long range champions and you're not going to be able to trade quite frequently or hit the turret. So an example of this is maybe your NAMI versus like Lux and Ezreal, or just 2 long range champions that are just going to kind of space you out, Caitlyn, Morgana, etc. Then opting into Coin has been a really good secondary that I've liked, and it keeps you just generating income, and it's very good for you. After that, boots are mostly the world is your oyster in this case. A lot of times I just like Lucidity just because it gives me early power levels in terms of just getting me closer to 40%. On top of that, since I run Transcendence quite frequently, then eventually it just gets converted over into 20 AP, which is definitely reasonable since I don't really like Moby Boots and I don't roam a lot. But you can make a case for Moby Boots if you move around a lot more, or you just want to be in certain situations a lot faster. After that, I always recommend going to Thenes first, not Ardent. The reason for this is Thenes has a lot more more power pushed into it because of how your kit works. Using your W, you're always guaranteed to be splashing damage on people, and since you can store up to 150, 200 extra healing, if you just look at the base numbers on your heal, which can go up to like 180 to 200, that means that it's almost an extra 100% efficiency on big heals, and you can't really get the equivalent AP numbers on this on pretty much any other item. So it's just really cost efficient, very powerful, packs a lot of punch, one tier item. On top of that, Ardent isn't very good to rush because it's based on a player level, and since if you're getting this as your first item, your player level is relatively low, I prefer to get this as my second item. After that, it's kind of just whatever you want. Since NAMI does actually have really good AP ratios, I sometimes tend to build NAMI with a Tear the Goddess early, just as a personal preference. Don't recommend it to everybody. It's mostly what you like and how spammy you are. But then because I run Transcendence, I just go back after the Athenes and Ardent, and I finish the Archangels, which is the completed tier, and then I get Death Cap. Now the reason why I don't get items like Redemption is because I just don't feel like it goes great with her kit, and her AP ratios are very, very powerful. But Redemption is totally a completely optional thing if you'd rather get that on this champion too. Things I don't recommend getting are things like Locket. Since you don't build pretty much any health on this champion, just don't be building items like this, as it's not going to be very valuable. You can also find niche times where Mikhail's is also a reasonable thing if there's a lot of crowd control to get your teammate out of it. Jumping into number 4 is going to be THRESH. Now the reason why THRESH is so powerful still is just because there's a huge emphasis on laning phase and being able to snowball. If your AD carry is a lot stronger than theirs, then you're just going to have a lot more damage output. Plus the fact that THRESH is a pretty much extremely versatile champion that can play both aggressively and defensively because of Lantern. He just has a lot of versatility and power levels in lane. On top of this, because of the fact that he can Lantern gank at all times, he just has a lot of implied pressure and really easy gank setup. On top of that, you can carry really hard with this champion because you're not only tied to your lane, but your roaming potential is very, very powerful. Because of this, he comes in at number 4. So, jumping into rune setups, we're still going to be running Aftershock even after the adjustments. I found that pretty much no other rune makes any sense. You can run Guardian, but I pretty much don't think it's that good, and I think it's a noob bait. So we're just going to be jumping into the setup that I have for Aftershock. So, obviously running Aftershock, and then the top one is mostly up to you. I've been predominantly running Font of Life. Now, you don't build too much health on it, so the numbers aren't too crazy on this, but I just like it as an extra healing ability for when I all-in quite frequently and want to fight. If you feel like you don't like this rune, Demolish is a completely reasonable thing to also pick up. It's mostly personal preference when it comes to this. After that, I usually opt into Conditioning just because of the fact that I like the extra armor and MR, as you can kind of see. I've fallen in love with this rune, and I've always been a big fan of it. Don't really like bone plating because it gets hit off. Now, if you're against a lot of poke champions, then it's completely reasonable to also opt into Second Wind, as this will just sustain you a little bit more from a lot of poke, since Thresh's biggest issue is actually getting poked out in the early stages and spaced out. After that, you kind of have two choices. If you like to go Redemption a lot, you get a triple multiplier effect from any healing and shielding bonuses, so Revitalize is actually really good if you like the Redemption first build. Now, if you feel like you're always squishy or you build like a lot of armor and MR and you're not opting too much into HP, since Relic doesn't feel that good on the champion anymore after the minion dematerializer nerf, I do recommend that Overgrowth is actually pretty good, so they give you about 150 extra health. After that, I've still been going for the most part Inspiration. Now, personal preference, I don't really like Hextech Flash because I don't utilize it very well, but I think most people would recommend you end up going Hextech Flash and Biscuits. You can also switch over to a Stopwatch if that suits you well, but for the most part, the rune stage I run is Biscuits and Cosmic Insight because I just like the extra CDR between everything, and I don't really use Hextech Flash very well. So, jumping into itemization for this champion is going to be as follows. Usually you want to get your tier 3 GP10 item in this case. So, for the most part, I go coin. The reason for this is it's just really hard to get relic stacks, especially in the mid game. And since Minion Dematerializer, as I've explained, has only 3 stacks now, you can't get all of the cannons from just Minion dematting. So, because of this, I just go coin pretty much exclusively. And I upgrade it as fast as I possibly can with Moby Boots weaved in between. This gives me a little bit of extra HP in the early stages and an extra ward, and since this champion is a very roam and pick heavy champion, I prefer having the vision advantage as best as possible. I've for the most part been going Redemption as my first item on this champion too, just because nothing else feels that great. After that, it's usually either a Zeke's or a Locket, whichever one I don't get is usually what happens afterwards. Sometimes I'll also weave in a Knight's Vow in there, and then a Gargoyle Stoneplate, just depending on the circumstances of whether or not I need a lot of physical armor, or if they're diving my AD carry. Although this champion is considered and classified as a range, so you get half effectiveness on Knight's Vow, I've just found that building these supportive items is going to be the best. The champion doesn't scale that great with itemization anyway, so usually all of your items want to reflect utility in this regard, and Knight's Vow fits the bill the same way Zeke's does and the same way Gargoyle does. So moving on to number 3 is going to be Sona. Nowadays, Baron is pretty much the most exclusive and important objective in the game, and Sona usually trivializes this objective by being able to give shields to all of her teammates. Plus, she excels exceptionally well in the mid game whenever there's team fights. In a lot of games that go past laning phase, she has an exceptionally high win rate across the board in pretty much every elo. So if you can just get her through laning phase reasonably well without feeding too hard, she carries very, very hard. She just gives so much stats to your team, and she synergizes super well with all of the items. And the later the game goes, and the more times your team throws, the more likely you are to win the game with this champion. So jumping into rune setup, I know a lot of people have asked me about the Kleptomancy build. It's terrible, don't do it, it's not good. You need to be risking your life way too much for the rune, and in general, it doesn't provide enough that is worthwhile. So we're gonna be jumping into Airy, and after that, we're gonna go Mana Flow Band, Transcendence, and Gathering Storm. This will give you the maximum potential for growth as the mid game comes in. All of your extra CDR will overcap and you'll be getting AP, plus Gathering Storm will be overcapping and giving you CDR, or giving you AP. And this will just make you incredibly powerful. Her AP ratios are very powerful, especially the E, because that will be giving you and your teammates a lot of mobility and movement speed, allowing you to kite in and out of team fights, which is very valuable. Now, the secondary runes are mostly up to you. If you feel like you're going to get all in or chased around a lot in team fights, a lot of people like going Conditioning and Revitalize. This is a completely reasonable rune setup, as it makes you pretty tanky in the mid game, since Conditioning will bump a lot of your armor and MR, and the extra healing from Revitalize is pretty noticeable. If instead you want to maybe have something that's more lane oriented, then what I've been opting into is Biscuit Delivery and Cosmic Insight, as I like biscuits a lot because it bridges your mana situations when you're starting to run trading a lot, plus it'll heal you a little bit more. On top of that, 5% CDR works exceptionally well with a champion like Sona, because you're spamming a lot of spells, and as you're investing points into the ultimate, it's shaving the cooldowns off it more. So just having more and more CDR just builds on top of itself. For itemization, one thing to note is you can build boots, but for the most part, I don't. Now the reason for this is your E gives you enough movement speed to usually supplement the movement speed loss of not having boots for the most part. It's relatively cheap in mana and spammable to move around the map, and this allows you to not spend as much gold on extra items to build towards this. Also on top of that, the reason why I don't like boots is because I usually build a tier reasonably early, potentially the first item or after the second item, which is Athene's, which I'll talk about in a second. But because of this, you have a lot less space in terms of your inventory to buy pinks and do other things. And because of that, I also skip boots. So save money, have more item slot efficiency is why I don't go boots, but you can make arguments if you want to build the boots instead. So I go tier, usually first item. If I don't do that, I usually get Athene's first, and then afterwards I build the tier. But the tier feels pretty necessary. Just when the timing happens is mostly determined by how often and frequently you're trading in lane and losing HP, versus how much ability power is really, really important. So maybe if I'm against like an Alistar or a Nautilus, and I feel like the tier isn't necessary for my laning phase, then I'll just get the Athenes as fast as possible, then get the tier afterwards. You'll stack it reasonably fast either way, so it's not a big deal. After that, we end up going Ardent Sensor as our secondary, kind of the same concept as NAMI. Then we finish the tier into Archangels, and then after that, I prefer to go Deathcap and then Lichbane, but a lot of people prefer Lichbane then Deathcap. Both orders are completely fine depending on how often and frequently you're weaving in your auto attacks and how comfortable you are with that. So jumping into number 2 is going to be Lux. Now the reason why Lux is so powerful right now and not a troll pick is just basically because of her versatility and functionality in the game. Laning and poking is really, really powerful, as it can get you access to plates, plus having CC guarantees you kills. So much like NAMI, she has a 2-second snare that can hit 2 players and can go through minions, and it's 2 seconds at 1 level of investment, which means you can invest in other skills and still gain value from hitting the snare. On top of that, because her E is so easy to hit for the most part, this is your damage spell. Because of this, you can just build full damage and actually carry games with her, which makes her incredibly potent and a very, very nice champion to play because she has multiple play patterns. On top of that, because of her W2, in situations where maybe you're falling behind or you just want to be like a shield bot, because the shield can hit all of your teammates the entire time, she also trivializes objectives like Baron, and she has multiple build paths that allow her to adjust on the fly in the game based on how much gold income you're having, which is not something almost any champion in the game can currently do for support. Usually it has to be predetermined. So jumping into rune setups. So there's 2 rune setups that you can kind of run. One is the Aftershock, which I want to acknowledge. I don't recommend running this in almost all cases. The only time I recommend running Aftershock is if the enemy lane can all-in you a lot. So if you're against maybe a Nautilus or a Galio, champions that have really easy access on jumping in on you and will set you up for an easy snare, running the Aftershock setup is fine. So for that setup, we're going to be running, obviously, Aftershock. And then after that, most people like Shield Bash, but I found that Shield Bash's numbers are actually pretty pitiful, between like 8 to 9 damage. And you're not going to be building health much. So you can go Demolish or Font of Life, depending on how frequently you're pushing in this lane. This top tree is, for the most part, your own decision. Then after that, I do recommend usually running Conditioning, but if you find that Bone Plating is a bit better and you want to keep yourself in the lane and alive more frequently, and you don't feel like it's going to get popped off randomly by random spells, Bone Plating is still completely fine, and then Revitalize is going to be what happens. After that, your secondary is just going to be Sorcery with the Mana Flow Band and Transcendence, just to make sure you don't run out of mana, and so that your build path is curved out correctly with the 10% extra CDR. So don't recommend this in almost all of the games, but that's kind of the niche pickup. So the setup I've been running pretty much exclusively in laning phase is Comet. Since your E has like a relatively short-ish cooldown, it overlaps with Comet pretty frequently as long as you're actively looking for trades. Gives you a ton of damage in laning phase, plus it scales into the late game when you're hitting snares and full comboing people with your snare, E, and R. After that, we're going to be taking Mana Flow Band and Transcendence. Now, you basically deviate based on what the goal of the lane is. Gathering Storm will always guarantee you the most AP, and it's completely fine to go. But since the Scorch buffs, I've been mostly running Scorch, and I've been pretty satisfied with how much damage it's doing in laning phase. After that, I run Inspiration, where I get Biscuits and 5% CDR. Once again, I really like Biscuits in a lot of situations because it bridges the mana issues that you could potentially encounter while playing aggressive between like the 3 to 5 minute mark in laning phase before you've completed your Mana Flow Band and upgraded your Spell Thieves. So, talking about itemization. So there's 2 ways, and one of the reasons why I really love this champion, to approach itemization. Number 1 is utility. So the utility build is really simple. Since you're running Transcendence, I usually get Lucidity Boots as fast as possible, get my tier 2 Spell Thieves, and then after that, I go Athene's Ardent, just because you're always dealing damage, even if you don't have a ton of points invested in it, and it just allows you to heal and cycle spells really well. Plus, it gives you extra ability power from all of your mana regen that's converted over. And then Ardent's obviously a given because you're shielding people. You can potentially shield all 4 of your teammates, so it's just a really efficient item. After that, I usually like Death Cap, just because your AP ratios are absolutely insane on that champion. Then the last item is kind of just up to your discretion. Maybe a Void Staff for damage. Redemption is completely fine too. Mikhail's to break people out of CC. All of these items are reasonably decent in some circumstances or another. So another thing to tie in with the utility setup is usually in situations like this, I put 2 to 3 points in my E early for laning phase, and then I max shield, and then come back and finish off the E later, and then max the root last, since you only get damage from investing points in your Q. This is like the utility build, basically. It puts a lot of points and pressure and just shielding people, and you just do damage as like a secondary element to that, and you snare to like CC and peel for people. So the damage build is a little bit different, where usually I'll either get a Morello's or a Ludens first. Sometimes I'll get Morello's in situations where I'm playing against a lot of healing and I need healing reduction. Easy example is when I'm playing against Soraka. Usually get Morello's really, really fast. If you don't need healing reduction, then you can just go Sorcerer Shoes, Oblivion Orb, if you really, really are snowballing very hard, or you can just opt into Ludens first. These are all completely fine build paths. After that, I get Death Cap, Void Staff, and then maybe my last item can also be a Morello Nomicon too. Or sometimes in cases where I feel like I do more than enough damage, my last item is just an Athene. Since you're doing so much damage, converting your shields to also heal feels really, really powerful in this situation. And for skill build for this, usually I max the E first all the way to 5. We have 1 point in our W. And then if you really feel like you can one-shot people, then you max the Q second because it's going to give you more damage on your burst cycle. but in situations where maybe you don't feel like that's completely necessary, you can max the E, then max the W second. Since reminder that the snare only increases in damage, not the cooldown or the duration of the snare. So jumping into finally, number 1 is going to be Nautilus. After a substantial amount of micro buffs to this champion, whether it be armor, base damage on the Q, extra duration on snare, this champion just seems incredibly oppressive and does way too much damage in lane, and honestly is too easy to play. The hook comes out incredibly fast. There's no windup like THRESH. It actually grabs onto people way farther than it should be. He can get ahead really easily. Plus on top of that, since a lot of AD carries are relatively short range right now, just the threat of his R being pressed on an AD carry is enough to create a complete field of zone for pressure in the laning phase and in team fights. Champion is just very powerful, especially if you ban Morgana. If you ban Morgana, this champion pretty much feels relatively impossible to deal with right now. So jumping into runes, we're going to be running Aftershock, and then after that, Font of Life. I exclusively like Font of Life because I usually build Zeeks, and since both your E Riptide and your Zeeks going off will proc Font of Life around you, it just gives so much healing and extra potential in the laning phase and in team fights that I just prefer this over everything. I've never been that big of a fan of Demolish, but if you don't really like Font of Life or you don't do a build path like this, Demolish is okay, but don't go Shield Bash. Shield Bash's numbers are just bad. They're just pitifully low, and it's not worth investing a rune into it. After that, I go Conditioning because I just want to be as tanky as possible. And then we take Overgrowth just to get extra HP from killing all the minions from our relic. After that, I like to still run Minion Dematerializer and then Cosmic Insight. The reason why I like Minion Dematerializer, even though it's down to 3, is because I don't want to be put in situations where I have to take huge trades or get poked a lot to get access to those cannons. So anytime I'm in situations like that, just having the Minion Dematerializer feels really good. Plus, I've tried Biscuits. For the most part, you don't have too many mana problems with this champion, and I found that if you're already low enough to get good value out of the Biscuits, you're screwed most of the time anyway in the laning phases. You're usually out of potions. Not a fan of it. And then Cosmic Insight just because boots feel bad right now, and I'd much rather just have 5% extra CDR for all of my spells to cycle on. So jumping into itemization, this is one of the champions that I don't recommend getting Moby boots on. You can if you decide that you're just going to roam and give up on your lane or whatever, but for the most part, this champion's an incredibly powerful frontliner like Tom, Kench, and Braum. And because of this, I usually either get Ninja Tabby or Merc Treads, just depending on the circumstances of how much crowd control versus auto attacking that's occurring in the team fights. After that, I want to upgrade my Sightstone, our relic, to tier 3. I really like this upgrade because it just gives you a ton of extra HP, makes relic proccing a lot easier so you gen more gold, plus the regen built into it is very powerful, and the 10% CDR feels super good. After that, the first item I always rush is Zeeks. As I said before, you pop the ultimate, you've got the Zeeks going around you, you're just proccing Font of Life, slowing a lot of people, you're just creating so much damage and zoning pressure in team fights. It just feels like a great item. Plus, I love the Glacial Shroud because it solves a lot of mana problem issues if you're constantly spamming spells in a team fight. After that, I usually end up going Knight's Vow right afterwards, then Locket, and then my last items are Gargoyle Stoneplate. Sometimes I shift around the Knight's Vow and Locket, just depending on how much magic damage or physical damage I'm receiving in a team fight. Anyway, guys, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment in the section below. Really appreciate all the support, and I'll see you next time. Later, guys.